This morning, I kind of tied in what I was going to say with the story of Nehemiah. This morning's about kind of where we're going as a church, but it actually really fits in quite nicely. And David gave a good introduction to our new series on Nehemiah last week. And Nehemiah was called by God, wasn't he, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, the city where God dwelt. He was called to, with his people, as we've already seen, to go and rebuild and repair. So today, it often feels as though we're a bit of a remnant of God's people in this land, doesn't it? So the church in this nation has been crumbling for some time, and sadly, 10% of churches in the UK have been lost in the last 10 years alone. A society once centred around its local church is now abandoning it. But we are humbled that though through God's work here, that our church is growing, along with many other churches like us. We are called to rebuild and repair so that once again the name of Jesus may be honoured in our society. So do you ever wonder if you are needed or you have anything to offer? In the book of Nehemiah, we read that everyone went to work, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, rebuilding, repairing and restoring. Each was given a portion of wall, and that was not that they could stand back and compare their work with others, but it was simply to be able to be getting on with the work that God would give them and do whatever He would have them do. So after 2,500 years, we're still reading about the individuals and the part that they had to play in the story that we've heard about this morning. And they were volunteers. None of them were professional builders, and they had all sorts of jobs prior to building the wall. But what they were was willing to get on with the task of rebuilding despite not having any previous experience. And you can read about that in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 12. They were involved as families as well, people of different ages. Every one of them was significant and nothing was beneath them. We read about the rebuilding of the Dung Gate, which is actually done by the district ruler of the time. And he didn't complain that that was beneath him, or that he wasn't trained to build the Dung Gate, but he simply got on with it. They were bringing honour to God's name. Now, opposition, ridicule came from outside, and discouragement came from within. Now, the same happened to Jesus. He was not welcomed by all, and he was opposed by many. And that opposition is still very real today. But we do not need to be afraid. Nehemiah increased his prayer and vigilance, and he didn't drop his guard. We should do the same. God is fighting for us. Churches can be filled, and our communities can be changed. The lost saved, and Jesus honoured. As we seek to rebuild God's kingdom in this town, the work will be hard, and we will face opposition. But we have a God who not only goes before us, but also goes with us. If we are called, like Nehemiah, to rebuild the walls of his kingdom in Kendal, then why and how? Can we have the next slide, please? So if you think I'm going to start and embark on some big PowerPoint presentation with an elaborate 10-point plan, I didn't actually count how many there was. There is 10. Yeah, there is. Our 10-point plan. There you go. with arrows, strategy, special formulas, and all the rest of it. Things that you might consider that will consist of some grand plan. Well, I'm sorry you're going to be disappointed with the next one. Actually, it's much simpler than that. Building God's kingdom comes down to one simple thing. Okay. I have talked about some of these things before, but it's actually really good to keep reminding us about those things that are important. And love, Matthew 22 verses 37 to 39 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest command." Well, love is an action, isn't it? It's not just a feeling. Now, my son Isaac, who was up here as one of the soldiers, loves football. You might have noticed he's often dressed as a footballer when he comes to church. He talks about it all the time. He gets up in the morning, comes into our bed, the first thing he does, YouTube goes on, and it's all football, it's all the matches that have been on the night before, it's all games from years back, it's people training, it's information about players and teams. In fact, he's an absolute wealth of knowledge. If you want to know any football information, I'm pretty sure he will know it. And if it's a school day, while he's waiting for the bus, he always wants to have a kickabout and practice his shots. School, he talks about football all the time. The teachers struggle to get him focused on what he's supposed to be doing. And at break time, he and his friends spend their time out on the football pitch playing football. After school and at weekends, he changes into his football kit and he has football practice on a Tuesday, plays for a team on a Saturday. He's absolutely obsessed about football. And he loves everything about it. Love of football takes, or would take, almost all his time and energy if we were to let it. We don't. True love, though, is all-encompassing, isn't it? It takes most of our thoughts, our time, our energy, and our attention. And this is what this verse is calling us to do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Like that takes effort, takes devotion, it takes time, and it takes persistence. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, from everything you do flows from it." If pursuing loving God, then that love if we are pursuing loving God, then that love captures our heart. If we allow other things in our life to be our focus, then eventually these are then what captures our heart, and it steers us away from Him. Has anybody ever been on a boat in choppy waters? Yeah? Particularly if it's a small boat and it's windy and there's waves, you can get thrown about quite a lot, can't you? Up and down, side by side. Your tummy's beginning to roll, isn't it? You probably feel it now when I'm talking about doing this. And it goes round and round. The best thing to do is to get down into the boat, into the centre of the boat, where you're not going to get bashed around quite as much. But also is to take your eyes out of the immediacy of what's in front of you and look out at the horizon, because the horizon doesn't move. Okay? So when our hearts are so full of loving God that our attention is fully focused on Him, then the waves of life seem a bit more manageable, don't they? So loving God with all our heart, soul and body is so much more than enjoying His presence here on a Sunday morning. It's 24/7, isn't it? 7 days a week. So my love for football is watching the odd match, keeping up with the odd scores when I remember. If my team lose a few, I don't get really upset like Isaac does. Sometimes we have to stop watching the TV because he's getting so upset if the opposition scores. So I turn my attention to Formula One. And especially now, another week, we've got the start of the season. If my team are not doing well in football, it's like, we'll leave that side and we'll go and watch Formula One instead. But that's not the love we're called to have for God. It's not just a Sunday or a weeknight evening or where things are going well. No, it's much more like Isaac's love for football. It's devotion, worship, praying, reading his word, an unconditional obsession. Our love for him should be our number one priority, day in, day out, just like Isaac's love for football. That's the love we should all be aiming to pursue. So further on the next verse in Matthew 22 is the second greatest command, and that's love your neighbour as yourself. Oh, you're already ahead of me. Well done. So I want to split this into two. So the first one is, who is my neighbour? And the second is, what is loving them like myself? Well, first, is my neighbour just the person who lives next door? Is that the only person that I need to love? So, what if you're like me and no one lives within a quarter of a mile of you? Have I got to love anybody then? Because I've not really got a neighbour, not next door. Or what about the person over the street or the person down the road? But actually, Jesus told a story that answered that question perfectly. In Luke 10, verses 25 to 37, we read about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And there was a conclusion at the end of that to who is my neighbour. And that was whoever might be in front of you, whoever you might encounter, whoever is in need. So now we've established, actually, who is my neighbour. How do I love them like myself? And in this day and age, that can actually be it can be a difficult concept for some people. Body image, personal circumstance, family problems can all give rise to difficulties in the concept of loving oneself. And this creates a problem. How can I love others if I can't love myself? But let's just take a little step back, and if we turn that around, and if we were the neighbour, how would we wish to be loved, especially if we were the one in need? If we were God's neighbour, how does he love us? The answer is that we should love our neighbour the same way, unconditionally. Just as we would wish to be loved ourselves. So what have we established so far? How should we love God? Unconditionally. And how should we love others, our neighbours? Also, unconditionally. So from that starting point, and how do we go and rebuild the walls of God's kingdom in Kendal? So love results in action. God's love for us resulted in one huge big action, didn't it? John 3:16 puts that well. So for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that for whoever believes in him shall not perish, but shall have eternal life. Our love for God should result in action. So for those of you that have kids, our love for them is unconditional, isn't it? Even though they aren't always little angels, and sometimes they drive us up the wall or around the bend. But generally, we would do absolutely anything for them. So what, as Christian parents, are our two main desires for our kids? And that's a test for you. Yeah, what would our two main desires be for our kids as we see them grow up? One, I would suggest, is that they grow up to know and love God and be in a relationship with Him. And two, I would suggest that our heart for them is to see that they're well provided for and they have plenty to eat and have a roof over their heads and a secure future. So for us as a church, that love that we have for our kids to know Jesus and the ability to have their basic needs taken care of should be the same love that we have for our neighbours, those around us, those people that live in Kendal. Now, 4.5 years ago, Lynn brought a prophecy about the Titanic and lifeboats. And I was looking at this as I was preparing this talk, and I was mindful to look at the prophecy again, because we've taken quite a bit of time looking at lifeboats over the years, but we missed that little bit about the Titanic off the front. And when you look at what the Titanic was, it was a luxury cruise liner, wasn't it? And it carried lots of people who were there to be entertained. They were there to be looked after well by the crew and to be eventually transported to the new world, their future. They didn't have to do anything for themselves or for others, and the ship itself was built to be unsinkable. But what happened? It sank. Yeah, that's right. So if we're not careful, we can be comfortable, enjoy the ride and let others do the work for us while we wait to get to that promised new world. But out of the blue, the Titanic sank. So as a church, I pray that we'll never be that complacent. Sadly though, as I said earlier on, the churches are sinking at an alarming rate. We have the next slide, please. We're called to be lifeboats, trained and equipped for rescue, going into difficult situations, putting out lifelines and being a helping hand to people who are lost, drowning and sinking. We have a role to play in this, whether it's been put out to sea in a lifeboat to seek and save the lost, whether it's training and equipping the lifeboat crews, whether it's identifying the areas where these people are going overboard, whether it's receiving those that have been rescued back again, whether it's helping them rebuild their lives, whether it's feeding those with nothing, and ensuring that their lives are changed so that they never end up in that place again. So over the last 18 months, we've seen in this church a real outpouring of the presence of God on our Sunday mornings, and it's been amazing. Now this is something that we've also seen in other Christ Central churches around our region and in other church streams as well. And we will continue to hunger after and seek his presence, developing that deep love for him, not only on a Sunday morning, but together. Well, I would encourage you to do that at home, at work, and wherever you go, is to seek his presence, that your love for him will then shine from you like a beacon. Our love for others is drawing us to look at where lifeboats can be launched in this town. And that's twofold. So that's both in areas of social action and in areas of evangelism. Now these two actually go hand in hand, and they must move forward together. So we as a church believe that like our love for our kids results in the desire to see them not only provided for physically, but more importantly, for them to meet Jesus and find their eternal needs met. That same love for God should bring an equal desire to see the lost both provided for practically, but also their souls saved as well. So that means on a practical note, that as a church we should be constantly trained and equipped to recognise those needs and meet those needs where we can. There are thousands of people out there that have very practical needs that need meeting. And every bit as many who need to know that faith in Jesus can meet their eternal needs. So as a leadership, we believe we should be building a church that recognises the needs for the most desperate in our society. It seeks to bring some relief, and it builds relationship and trust. When we invest time in others, our faith in Jesus shines like a beacon of light into dark places, giving us opportunities so that we can be people open to our faith, and that you can see the difference that Jesus makes in our lives. Serving those in need, building relationships, and sharing Jesus should never be done out of a feeling of guilt or expectation, but it should be done out of an overflow of the love of Jesus in us. It's a reflection of him. So when we talk about evangelism, many of you are probably thinking, ooh, there's a shiver running down my spine and there's a feeling of apprehension. And you often think, lots of people often think of evangelism as street work, talking to strangers or going door to door. Now, for some people, actually, they love doing that and are really good at it, and I would never discourage them, so long as they're able to do it in a sensitive and engaging manner. Go for it. But for many others, that's not their gifting, and we're not going to push them in that direction, because all it does is end up in paralysis and fear, and then nothing happens. So for most of us, though, evangelism is putting ourselves in places where we can meet people, help in some way, and build relationships. We have to be intentional. So that means maybe not spending all your time with Christian friends. Maybe getting out and getting a hobby where you can mix with other people. So have you ever... I'll use my props now. Have you ever grown cress? There you go. Yeah, you probably did it at school when you were young. You plant it in a little tray, few seeds with a little bit of water and maybe on a sponge. Sowing to harvest of cress is about a week to 10 days. That's very quick. Does anybody know what that is?
Potato.
No. Avocado. It's an avocado seed, you're right. Any idea how long it takes an avocado seed, once planted, to get to harvest? 10 to 15 years. Yeah. So, if I was to plant that avocado and expect to harvest in a week to 10 days, I'd be a little bit discouraged and disappointed that I haven't seen a harvest, wouldn't I? But that's because an avocado is not cress, and you need to be patient. So as a farmer, I've learned over the years to plant different seeds at different times into soils prepared differently for those different seeds. Different seeds need different levels of moisture, different temperature. They all require different levels of fertiliser, and they must be planted at the right time in the right season. Over the years, I've been trained and equipped to know how to prepare the ground just so the seed can be planted at the right time. Social action and relationship building is preparing the ground. Evangelism is knowing which seed to plant at the right time to eventually produce a harvest. Over the last few months, a few things have started to happen in and around the church to prepare the ground and to start to get some more lifeboats ready. We've already have a wonderful lifeboat in the shape of the food bank, don't we? And this is amazing, has and is amazing at providing for the needs of the hungry in Kendal, and has been for how many years? Linda, you'll know. How many years? 12, 15 years?
Since
2012. 13 years. Yeah. So we've heard this morning about Manor House and their work with the homeless, and we're able to get involved in that later in the month, and I would encourage you to do so. Lynn has recently taken over the running of the food bank, and with James are continuing the wonderful work that Alistair and Linda have so faithfully dedicated years of their time to. Lynn has also been taken on in a secondary role, and that's going to be funded, or is being funded, by the church half a day a week to assess the needs in this town and to look at how, as a church, we might bring help to those that really need it, other than just the hungry. She's especially looking into areas that will bring us, the church, into relationships with people that are struggling in our communities. To be able to prepare the ground, then eventually for the seed of evangelism, and showing the love of Jesus. Now, she's not necessarily going to act as the one that delivers all of that, but as an enabler. She'll do the background work. So if you have a heart to serve in this area, to help those that really need it, and if God has laid something on your heart in these particular areas, then please go and chat to Lynn, and she will help facilitate that and maybe hone you in a particular direction. So as a leadership, we can't do everything. But if God is speaking clearly, and He's leading us and leading you, then we want to be able to support and encourage and enable it. Over the last 12 months, for examples, we've had Lynn come to us with a heart for reaching people through other social action projects. We've had Beth reaching out to us with the idea of setting up King's Kiddies, which has been really successful, and now moving on into family and children's work, working for the church. Adam set up the John 17 prayer group. Tom, Beth Reeve and James have been involved in instigating and running prayer groups. And then regionally, Rachel Delamere came to us with the idea of regional worship nights. Now, God was also speaking to us about these things, but He was also speaking to others at the same time with a heart to get on and do it. And we are happy then to give our support to things that come from the heart of God and that show our love for Him and for others. So as we move forward, we will hear more of these God-inspired outworkings of love for Him. So next week, we've got Steve Hurd, who'll be visiting us from Christ Central, and he, with others over a long period of time, will occasionally dip in and help us be equipped and trained and released into evangelism, both as individuals and also as those been in the teaching and preaching of the